Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Davidson, registered psychotherapist and your host and creator of my wellness podcast, Mind the Gaps, surrendering our typical ways of looking at life to step out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone. Welcome to episode number 10, Ever Evolving, where we're joined by Professor of Psychology and researcher in evolutionary psychology, Dr. Pat Barclay. Dr. Barclay completed his PhD in psychology at McMaster University in 2005. After 4 years as a postdoctoral associate and lecturer at Cornell University, he returned to Canada in 2009 to work at the University of Guelph. He is currently cross-appointed to the Department of Psychology in the Bachelor of Arts Science program, where he conducts research on the evolution of human cooperation. His research combines evolutionary biology, social and cognitive psychology, mathematical game theory, animal behavior, and experimental economics, all with a flavoring of anthropology and sociology. In 2015, he won the Early Career Award for Distinguished Scientific Contribution from the Human Behavior of Evolution Society, the world's foremost academic society for evolutionary approaches to studying human behavior. I first met Pat during the third year of my undergraduate degree when I walked into his class called Evolutionary Psychology. After that first lecture on examining human psychology through an evolutionary lens, I was hooked. I knew a bit about evolutionary theory, but coupling it with psych theories just blew my mind. In my fourth year of my undergrad, I reintroduced myself to Pat as a student completing her thesis research project, asking if he would do me the honor of being my advisor. Pat accepted my application, and from then on, I had the pleasure of working with him and learning from him as I ran research trials to do with something called virtue signaling. Virtue signaling involves behaving in certain ways to show others that we're cooperative or trustworthy, all of which we'll dive into very soon. So fast forward to 2024, Pat accepts my invitation to join me on my podcast, and here we are. Evolutionary psychology, in a nutshell, is about exploring the primary functions of our behavior so that we can understand why we do the things we do. I'll leave it to Pat to explain the rest. So I think the reason I love evolutionary psychology so much is that it gives us a new way of looking at things. It invites curiosity and digging deeper, always, which in Mind the Gaps terms, nudges us out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone. It's very fitting, actually, that evolution is literally all about growth and transformation from our hominin ancestors to Homo sapiens today. This recording was such a fun and informative free flow of conversation. We covered a wide range of topics from taboos, cooperation, altruism, casual dating and long-term dating, how nice guys can finish first, and all from an evolutionary perspective. So, without further ado, I invite you to take a seat in this virtual classroom with us now. For all things Mind the Gaps, you can find me on Instagram at Kirsten.Davidson. I'm happy to answer every single one of your questions, comments, or feedback, and most of all, I'm happy to have you as part of the Mind the Gaps community. If you're interested in booking a therapy session with me, please feel invited to email me at kirsten@mindthegaps.co. or schedule an online appointment through the link found on all my social media platforms. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome, Pat. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I started off by asking Pat if he could tell us a little bit more about his story, how he first became interested in evolution, psychology, and ultimately in evolutionary psychology.
So I was a psychology undergraduate in a Bachelor of Science. And so I was taking many biology courses at the same time that I was taking psychology courses. And I took a third year animal behavior course. And in it, we covered a little bit about the evolution of altruism. We watched this video. It was called Nice Guys Finish First. And it was Richard Dawkins talking about some of the work from his famous book, The Selfish Gene. And he presented the results of a computer simulation showing that cooperation can pay off under a lot of circumstances. And whereas selfishness can sometimes get selected against by evolution. And to a young, third-year undergrad, that just blew my mind, right? We're ingrained with this idea that evolution is survival of the fittest, nature red in tooth and claw, right?
Mhm.
It's this vicious, vile, selfish world, right? This is kind of what we're taught about evolution and natural selection. But then there's this video and this results of this computer simulation, just it blew my mind. It's like, well, no, hang on a second. Even in the cutthroat world of natural selection, you can get niceness evolving. And
Mm.
I thought that was the coolest thing ever. As somebody who's like tries to be nice most of the time, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so I was totally fascinated by this. And I was like, wow, like I love evolution, but I also really love psychology.
Mhm.
Can I combine the two of them and, I don't know, create some kind of evolutionary psychology? As it turns out, the field already existed, and it was still fairly new at the time, but two of the founders were just down the road in Hamilton. At McMaster University, there was Martin Daly and Margot Wilson. And I was like, okay, if you can't start it, join it. So
Mhm.
I went to work with them for a PhD studying cooperation, and the rest is history.
Mm. That's amazing. I love hearing stories like that where the passion is first lit up in you and you can so hear it, right? You go back to that moment. And that's how I felt in your class. I was just reminiscing with Pat before we started recording that when I first went into that class, I think your passion that you bring to it is contagious as well, but then learning all these things that you didn't really think about before and feeling that you just want to dive in and keep learning more and there's always more to learn in this field for sure.
There's always more to learn. Yeah, and that's you'll find a lot of scientists get genuinely excited
Oh
about
yeah.
what they do, right? Because it's a long process. Science is hard to do, and it's that passion, it's that interest that keeps people going and keeps us trucking away despite experiments sometimes not working. It's just, we're just genuinely interested, and we can talk your ear off if you let us.
I took a moment to ask Pat if he could tell us how evolutionary researchers see human behavior differently from other researchers.
Okay, great question. There's a couple of ways. One is that evolutionary researchers look at why things are the way they are and why they're not some other way.
Hmm.
So one is that one way we do that is to look at function, right? So as opposed to behaviors just being random, we ask, well, why is that behavior there? What function does it serve? It's produced by the brain in some way, but why do we have a brain that's designed to do these behaviors in these situations and not something else?
Hmm.
So to use the example of altruism, helping others, right? You might say, well, somebody might ask, well, why is this, why would somebody be altruistic? And some people will say, well, there's something in that person's brain that makes them be altruistic, right? Maybe they feel good about helping others.
Hmm.
And this is a good answer, but it's incomplete because you can then ask, well, why do people feel good about helping others? Why don't we feel horrible whenever we help others? Right? You were a potential competitor. I have just helped you compete against me. Why should that feel good? That should feel terrible.
Hmm.
But no, like many of us do feel good when we see others doing well. And so an evolutionist would ask, well, why is that? Why is the brain built so that at least some people, some of the time, feel good for helping?
Hmm.
So part of what makes evolutionists think differently is that focus on the function and look at, well, what does that behavior accomplish? Are there some sort of corresponding benefits that would cause this behavior and a psychology that produces that behavior to evolve?
Right.
So why does it exist? Are there benefits for it that would cause it to proliferate, as opposed to everybody feeling horrible whenever they help others? So
Hmm.
that's part of it, is that focus on function. Another way, though, that evolutionists see human behavior differently is because we draw a lot from biology and in particular animal behavior, is that strips away many of the preconceptions that people have about humans. So normally when we see humans, we think, oh, this is what I would do. And everybody thinks they know why they do what they do. And we have all these other assumptions that we get from our culture, from our friends and so on. But when you look at humans like another mammal, albeit a very smart and social mammal, a mammal that learns a lot from other beings, but still has many of the same basic pathways, the same basic brain mechanisms as the other mammals, it helps to strip away some of those preconceptions and helps you to generate new predictions without being encumbered by some of our assumptions which might be false.
Right. And what would one of those assumptions be?
One might be the extent to which a behavior is governed by social norms.
Yeah.
So let's take, for example, the fact that most humans are not interested in having sex with their siblings, despite what Game of Thrones and other pop culture references might imply to you. This is something that most people aren't inclined to do, right? Like Freud is completely wrong on this idea about humans wanting, little boys wanting to sleep with their mothers. No, this is not a real thing. So there's another, I guess, difference with evolutionists is it helps researchers to figure out if some ideas are a priori implausible. So Freud had these ideas like, little boys want to sleep with their mothers. Well, this doesn't make any sense evolutionarily. This is highly unlikely to have evolved because there's big genetic costs for doing so. So there's an advantage to having a theory that's maybe a better description of human behavior.
Right.
But back to this topic of why don't people want to have sex with their siblings? Now, if you listen to like kind of standard assumptions, people will talk about taboos, right? There are strong norms governing incest. And most people would say, oh, these norms, these taboos are why people don't want to have sex with a sibling. Until you realize a couple of things. One is that many other mammals manage to avoid having sex with their siblings under normal circumstances, yet they don't seem to have norms or taboos the same way that humans do. So they managed to do something to figure this out. And many people, if you were to ask them, why don't you want to have sex with your siblings? It's more just like the response is more likely to be something like, well, right? It's something visceral. It's not, oh, I don't want to do this because people tell me not to. It's more, I don't want to do this because I have zero desire to do it. There's certainly a repulsion. But where does this come from? If you look at how other species solve this problem, it's because they have something that makes them not interested in anybody in the same nest as them. Right? So anybody growing up in the same family, the same nest, is likely to be a sibling. And so there's just this complete non-attraction to them. And it's the same thing with humans. If you grow up with somebody in a very sibling-like relationship, in the same family with the same parents, you'll grow up to be not sexually attracted to them. Even if they happen to be not actually your sibling. Maybe they're adopted, right? Maybe, you're put together in a kibbutz, right? But you're raised in a sibling-like relationship, you're not interested in them. Conversely, if somebody is actually your sibling, but you're raised apart and you only meet them as an adult, well, maybe you might be attracted to them, despite the taboos. Here's this normal assumption that human behavior is caused by taboos, but instead, an evolutionist might say, well, maybe not. Let's look at how other non-human animals solve this problem, and then maybe that could be how humans do it as well.
There's a built-in mechanism, and as I say built-in, I'll change that to evolved mechanism to avoid that because of the costs of having a child with someone in your nuclear family.
Exactly. There are potentially big costs, recessive mutations being expressed in the offspring and so on. Now, just because this is built in doesn't mean it can't be overridden, right? If there are very strong social pressures strong enough to outweigh, an evolved response, right? Think of many other evolved response, right? We've evolved to avoid dangerous stuff, but If your child is in danger, you can override that evolved response to avoid danger in order to rescue your child. It's, the mama bear phenomenon, which, being a parent, I can assure you applies to dads as well. It's the one thing, that can really motivate somebody is to protect their kid. And that will override a number of other evolved mechanisms. It's if there is a stronger pressure, if there's an immediate danger, if there's very strong social pressure, then sometimes, people can get beyond that evolved fear of predators or, the evolved ick of having sex with a sibling or whatnot, if some other pressure is correspondingly strong enough. So some behaviors are adaptive in that they bring positive consequences, right? To an evolutionist, we think of, the ultimate, positive consequence being reproduction,
Right.
or what we would call evolutionary fitness. But realistically, you can look at anything that's kind of a proxy for fitness and reproduction, right? So, we evolved to maximize things that are statistically associated with reproduction, like social status, right? Because in pre-modern societies, actually many societies today, under some certain circumstances, status means more surviving offspring. We evolved to, maximize esteem in the eyes of our peers, to maximize the well-being of our offspring, to maximize, to make sure we have a stable food source, et cetera, right? Anything which help us to survive and or reproduce. So something is adaptive if it brings positive consequences, produces good outcomes in terms of any of these proxies. Something is maladaptive if it does not, right? If it in fact decreases fitness or any reasonable proxy of fitness. And organisms will sometimes behave adaptively, sometimes will behave maladaptive. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why our behavior might not be optimal. Sometimes we just have bad information about the world, just like the gazelle who accidentally wanders in the direction of the cheetah. That's not adaptive, but, well, it didn't know. So stuff can be maladaptive for that. Sometimes something might look maladaptive, but actually isn't. So, for example, you will sometimes get people who are in a very desperate circumstances doing things like taking desperate risks, or having kids extremely early, right? Having kids as a teenager, sometimes even engaging in crime, when they might have a high chance of getting caught. And on the surface, this might seem to be maladaptive until you realize, well, what's their alternative option, right? So if somebody is in desperate enough circumstances, well, desperate times call for desperate measures. And so people might take what appear to be maladaptive decisions to others, but are actually attempting to make the best of a bad job.
Right.
Just like if you were to see a hockey team remove its goalie from the ice and put some other dude on the ice, right? Which makes them way more likely to get scored on. Right? So why would a hockey team ever do such a dumb thing as to pull the goalie out in order to put this other guy on, which doubles their chances of getting scored on? Until you realize that teams do this at the end of the game if they're losing and they're unlikely to win normally. Well, the optimal decision for a losing team is different from the optimal decision for a winning team. So if you're losing, then this, quote, dumb behavior of removing the goalie is actually a really good play. It's a desperate play because, yes, you're likely to get scored on, but it's making the best of a bad situation because it's your only hope of scoring and tying the game. So similarly, if people find themselves in desperate circumstances, they might do things like take dumb risks. They might not invest in in their retirement. Why? Because they didn't have the money. They needed it to pay their rent. So an evolutionist would look at some of these behaviors and say, well, rather than being pejorative and saying this is bad, this is maladaptive, an evolutionist might look at these and say, well, to what extent is this a good fit for that person's circumstances? And might this behavior have some function for the particular circumstances that that person finds themselves in?
Right, right. This is all reminding me of so much of the approach that I take with clients when we're looking at, are you in this survival mode, right? And so
Yeah,
if you're in survival mode, to your point, there's going to be times where you take risks and it pays off, and there's going to be times where you take risks and it does not pay off, but ultimately we're not just labeling the behavior as like, well, this is maladaptive, there's something wrong with you. We're saying, well, the behavior is not helpful, but what's the reason behind it? And why are we thinking that it's going to be helpful? Or is it going to be helpful?
right. Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting because sometimes people will do something, and for an outsider, it seems like bad, but it might actually be good for that particular person.
Right.
But on the other hand, people might also be mistaken about what is in their best interest. And in some cases, they could be like the gazelle accidentally wandering towards the cheetah, right? They
Hmm.
just have incorrect information about the state of the world and what's going to help them. In some cases, it could be because their environment has changed,
Right.
right? So if you grow up in one particular set of circumstances, some behavior that paid off there might not pay off in the broader world or in a new circumstance, right?
Hmm.
The behaviors that pay off when you're 5 years old, you know, crying and getting mommy and daddy to fix it, don't pay off when you're 25 years old.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's what was helpful then. We don't have to get mad at that inner child. It's just, it's not helpful now. Right. So,
That's true.
yeah.
Yes. So sometimes people's circumstances have changed, yet their behavior hasn't yet caught up to
Hmm.
in order to be adaptive for their new environment. And
Yeah.
so the quicker a person's environment changes, the less likely it is to be adaptive because they might not yet have had time to learn what is adaptive in the new environment. They
Hmm.
might still be applying heuristics that worked well in the old environment. Whereas changes from childhood are so gradual that kids will have plenty of time to adjust to a new environment. But if you just pick somebody out of one environment and drop them in another one, their behavior may or may not be adaptive. All
Hmm.
bets are off.
Hmm. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, okay, there are a lot of situations though, and I'm sure, like, I know I've experienced it, I'm sure you've experienced it, where we act as if we are children. And although we've had the time to mature, there's it's almost like we forget that we're adults, and there's this, we'll say, knee-jerk or automatic reaction to go back to that 5-year-old.
In some ways, the world of a 5-year-old is very nice in that you have people who are, looking out for your best interest most of the time.
Hmm.
Of course, trading it off with their own best interest to some extent. Where others around you seem to have all the answers, and you can, deal with black and white as opposed to shades of gray. And that's part of learning is to deal with simple scenarios to give you practice so that eventually you can deal with more complex circumstances.
Mm.
And childhood is a very good time for learning all of the contingencies of the world, figuring what causes what doesn't cause what are the consequences, with the hopes that by the time that one is an adult and able to stand on their own, that somebody has kind of learned what pays off for them in their circumstances, keeping in mind that what pays off for one person might not pay off for somebody else.
Right.
So, if somebody is very attractive, charming, physically fit, the strategy of, hey, go out and chat up everybody that that's going to pay off for them. Whereas if somebody is maybe not as good at the casual chatting, then their optimal strategy for them is not going to be maybe as being as outgoing,
Hmm.
attempting to chat up everybody. Their optimal strategy might be more focusing on just a few good friends, one stable partner, rather than kind of playing the field, so to speak.
Mm. Makes sense. And that kind of reminds me of what you said at the start about this study you learned on nice guys finishing first. I'm
Yeah,
curious. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
sure. The The standard wisdom, I'm using scare quotes for wisdom here,
Mhm.
is that nice guys finish last, right? What this was the computer simulation of cooperation. And so what the researchers used a very simple game as sort of a model for cooperative scenarios. So researchers will sometimes do this. We'll create a very simplified scenario that captures some of the elements of the real world, right? The possibility of cooperating, but also having the other person, cheat on you,
Mm.
right? And break your trust. And it's kind of like a map, a simplified version of reality in order to provide some insights, kind of like a fruit fly. It's the fruit fly of behavioral research, or lab rat of, whatever your model organism is.
Mhm.
And so it was a game called the Prisoner's Dilemma. Now, in a prisoner's dilemma, you have imagine two prisoners who are being interrogated by the police separately in separate rooms. And the police offer them each of a deal. Hey, we want you to rat out your buddy and give us evidence against your buddy. If you do, you get to go free and we'll put them in jail for 10 years. If neither of you rats each other out, well, we have some evidence you're both going to go to jail for 1 year. But if both of you rat each other out, then, wow, we don't really need either of your testimony. We're going to give each of you 3 years. Now, this is a dilemma for the prisoners because each of them in their separate cells, having to make this decision separately, knows that if they both cooperate with each other, then it's their best outcome.
Mhm.
They'll only get a tiny bit of jail time each. It's collectively bad for both of them if they rat each other out, if they defect on each other. But the incentives are such that regardless of what the other person does, it pays to defect, to rat out your partner. If you rat them out and they stay silent, then you get to go free.
Mm.
Conversely, if they're going to rat you out, well, you can get 3 years for also ratting them out, or 5 to 10 years if you stay silent, right? So no matter what they do, you're better off to defect.
Right.
And it's a nice scenario because it captures this conflict between what's best for everybody if we cooperate with each other versus the selfish payoff of, hey, I can do better for myself if I defect, if I don't cooperate.
Mm.
So what these researchers did is they used kind of example payoffs, and they had a bunch of other researchers submit computer strategies on how to play this scenario. So it's kind of like having a bunch of little agents within a computer going around, meeting each other, and playing this prisoner's dilemma for a whole bunch of rounds with each other, and then kind of tabulating the total scores and see, okay, which little avatar did the best in this game. So what is the strategy that maximizes your payoff in this game? And they had some strategies just behaving randomly. They would have some strategies that were kind of sampling. I'm going to try to cooperate, but then I'm going to see if I can get away with defecting on the other guy, and see if that pays off better. You had other strategies who would start out cooperating, but then if the other guy defected, would just instantly retaliate and say, "That's it. I'm never cooperating with you again." And the researchers compared, well, what strategies had the highest payoff here? And the answer was an extremely simple strategy. It was called tit for tat, which starts out cooperative, but then afterwards it simply imitates whatever its partner did the previous round. So
Mm.
if you and I are playing this game, if we both start out and if I'm playing tit for tat, if you cooperate in round one, I cooperate in round two. You cooperate in round two, I cooperate with you in round three. You defect on me in round three, I defect on you in round four.
Mm.
You go back to cooperating in round four, I go back to cooperating with you in round five. And it beat a whole bunch of strategies, including very nasty strategies, always defect or, attempt to get away with cheating. And the reason it did really, really well is because it cooperated with anybody else who was willing to cooperate. But at the same time, it wouldn't get suckered by anybody for long.
Mm.
If somebody cheated it retaliated immediately.
Okay.
If somebody went back to cooperating, it went back to cooperating. It was very forgiving as well. So it
Mm.
didn't get stuck in long ruts of mutual defection. And this strategy won under a number of circumstances. They even simulated evolution within the computer, where there were a number of copies of these different strategies. And if a strategy had a high payoff, it would leave more copies in the next generation. A
Mm.
strategy with a low payoff would have fewer copies in the next generation. So simulating evolution by natural selection within the computer.
Wow.
And what they found is that this tit for tat strategy always came out on top
Huh.
because it cooperated with anybody who's willing to cooperate, and ended up getting a very high score because of that. But it wouldn't get suckered for long from anybody who was cheating it.
Right.
And I heard this and I was just like, wow, this is so cool that this idea of cooperating pays off. Not just pays off, but it will evolve. It will leave more copies of itself. It will evolve by natural selection. So despite there being nasty strategies out there, cutthroat cheats, this extremely cooperative but simple strategy did really, really well.
Mm.
And I found that very powerful, partly because it's a very simple scenario, and it just, like I was talking about, stripping away preconceptions, right? We have all these preconceptions about why people cooperate. And here this kind of strips that down to the bare logic of cooperation pays off with another cooperator.
Right.
And two cooperators do better than selfish loners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if you and I cooperate together, then each of us is in a much better position to compete against anybody else. And so
Right.
our cooperation pays off. I benefit from helping you because that makes you more likely to help me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, my
So
brain is just buzzing right now. So many different questions. I want to ask about signaling theory. I want to ask about the survival of the fittest. I guess I'll start with, so because altruism can pay off,
yes,
then how does this counter the whole survival of the fittest? We are inherently selfish and bad creatures.
right. So this shows that selfishness is not inevitable, and that there are many circumstances where cooperation, altruism, can pay off, can be selected for.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, right? This isn't some, starry-eyed wonder, oh, everything will always be lovely. Well, no, there
Right.
are circumstances when it pays and there are circumstances where it doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you and I are going to be interacting for a long time, then it pays to cooperate. If the shadow of the future is long, then it pays to cooperate. But if
Mm.
people are only interacting once and carry no reputation to any other game, any other interaction, well, unfortunately, cooperation doesn't pay off in those circumstances,
Right.
right? So the theory will predict, well, here's when cooperation will evolve and when it won't.
And that totally
Um,
fits with the model of, if we're saying nice guys finish first, well, ultimately, does someone want to be with a partner who is going to treat them poorly for the rest of their lives, or is it just the
yes,
high in the short term?
that's exactly it. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in a couple of different ways there. One is that what pays off in a short-term relationship is different from what pays off in a long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So people might select for different things when they're looking for a one-night stand versus, a marriage partner.
Right.
Things like good character become way more important in a long-term romantic partner,
Mm-hmm.
because you got to put up with this person on a daily or near daily basis. And so as a result, it pays to select somebody who is going to be a decent person, who is going to cooperate, who's going to do their share of the household chores, who's going to do their dishes,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Fill in the blank with whatever task you want here. The selection for cooperation, for niceness, matters more for long-term relationships. And I've done some research, not just with these games, but also using things like simulated dating ads,
Mm.
and who do people want in a dating partner. And what you see is that if people are choosing a long-term partner, then people start to value cues of good character.
Right.
And this goes against this idea that, nice guys finish last, right? We all think about this because we see, bad guys, bad boys, bad girls, whatever, who seem to be doing well, right?
Hmm.
You compare the dashing bad boy with the kind of lame and wimpy nice guy, and of course everybody prefers the dashing bad boy. And it's like, yeah, it's because all else is not equal here, right? You gotta, if you're comparing a dashing bad boy who's athletic, who's good looking, who's rich and has all these other desirable qualities with, a wimpy nice guy who's ugly, socially awkward, fill in whatever negative qualities you want. Well, all of those other positive qualities are going to outweigh the badness, so to speak.
Mm.
But if you were to hold all else equal, if you were to have exactly the same person, the same picture, the same description, but only varying whether or not there's a cue of altruism, our research shows that people prefer the altruistic version over the neutral version. Conversely, some people might, look at you picking, the bad guy and say that's maladaptive that they're choosing this the bad boy.
Right.
Well, if they're choosing for a very short relationship, then the badness doesn't really matter. So maybe
Hmm.
that decision wasn't maladaptive.
Right.
So
Right.
you've always got to be careful when judging others in order to look at their specific circumstances and their specific goals.
Hmm. 100%. It's so subjective. And I'm also thinking now of how people will label those decisions as superficial, we'll say, if they're not looking at what's skin deep.
Yep.
And maybe you could speak to what are the evolutionary benefits of those quote unquote superficial traits?
So when we're looking for partners, whether it's a romantic partner, whether it's a friend or whatever it is, we we rely on a number of cues, right? There are certain things that we want in different kinds of partners. Like in a friend, we want somebody who's going to be loyal. We want somebody who is likely to help us.
Hmm.
We want somebody who is able to help us. As opposed to the ne'er-do-well friend, who they mean well, but they can never really get their crap together. We desire partners who are competent, and we benefit from choosing partners who are competent, but also are likely to help us. So I'm not suggesting that people consciously select based on these traits. Instead, like our brains make these calculations for us. We evolved to like people who exhibit cues of being competent.
Hmm.
Why am I friends with my friends? I'm friends with them because I like them. I find them enjoyable people to be around, and I trust them. But from a functional perspective, I like being around them and I enjoy their presence because they show cues of being loyal, of being willing to help, being competent, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
When it comes to romantic partners, there's some other elements laid on top there, right? Romance could result in offspring. And so we might also look for cues of how good is this person going to be at producing high quality offspring, right? So again, nobody consciously thinks this way, but
Hmm.
instead we've evolved to be attracted to things that are cues of fertility, good offspring. Like we evolved to be attracted to things like symmetry. We evolved to find like lopsided features maybe less attractive.
Hmm.
We evolved to not be attracted to open bleeding sores, but instead to be attracted to, smooth, clear skin.
Hmm.
So those are examples. And the reason that, there are direct benefits for this, where if you're pairing with somebody who is, fairly symmetrical, they are less likely to have diseases that you're going to catch, but they're also likely to pass those traits on to any offspring.
Hmm.
So we will choose people who have cues of things we need, whether that's health in a partner, competence, good quality offspring, and so on.
Hmm.
And we weight different traits according to what we need in that relationship. So if people are just having a one-night stand, they don't need character because they're only with that person for one night. So instead, these so-called superficial traits are going to dominate. Cues of attractiveness, cues of health, maybe competence. Whereas for longer term relationships, we start placing more weight on cooperativeness, altruism, personality compatibility, sanity, just to make sure that we will be able to interact with that person in another 10 years.
And so we're talking a lot about signaling, and sometimes signaling is not within our control because we just show up as we are, and there are signals in how we show up. What is signaling theory, if you could explain to listeners, and how does signaling theory relate to cooperation?
Great question. So if I were to say, hey, I'm a high quality partner, you should befriend me, you should mate with me, you should ally with me, you're going to be like, okay, are you really high quality? I don't know if I believe that, right? We have a conflict of interest here because I want to appear to be high quality, however you define quality. I have an interest in appearing to have those qualities. Whereas you have an interest in only picking somebody who actually possesses those qualities.
Right.
So there's this conflict here. How do we solve this? Would be if you were to use things which either cannot be faked or are difficult to fake or just too costly to fake. So for example, I could tell you, hey, I don't have smallpox. Now you can take my word for it, or you can look to see if I have open bleeding sores, right? If I have open bleeding sores, it's a cue that I got something you don't want. So you're probably going to avoid me. So that might be one thing, is by using things that are cues that can't really be faked. I can tell you I am a really physically fit person. I would be an excellent friend, romantic partner, whatever. You could take my word for it, or you could see, okay, is he able to do a slam dunk? Is he able to ski that double black diamond? Is he able to lift, do 30 push-ups? Is he able to, walk a straight line while chewing gum without falling over? Whatever your test is, those are all cues that you can use. So it's not just cheap talk. Now, signaling theory is the idea that I will invest in some of these cues in order to convince you to prove my honesty. I will do things that are not possible or not worthwhile in order to prove my competence, my warmth, my likelihood of cooperating with you. And so, this is why, peacocks will grow their big, huge, massive tails, right? Look at me carrying around this big, massive tail. I couldn't carry around such a nice, beautiful tail if I were a low quality peacock. Or, look at me doing this slam dunk. I couldn't do that if I were actually really clumsy. So organisms will invest in traits that prove their qualities. Now, this is easier to think about when we think about like physical qualities. I am, investing in these behaviors, these athletic behaviors, my athleticism to show my physical competence, or I'm investing in a university degree to prove my intelligence. Or I am investing in a lot of gold bling and a Ferrari to prove my wealth. For the record, I do not have a Ferrari, nor do I have a lot of bling. But those things would be a pretty good cue of somebody's wealth. But you can also have signals of cooperative intent. One of the best examples is a diamond ring. And that a diamond ring is very costly, but it would be used as a signal of, I am legitimately interested in you. It would not be worth it for me to give you this diamond ring worth, 2 or 3 months of my salary, if I intended to leave tomorrow in the morning. It's only worth it if I intend to stick around. And so that becomes a very good signal of somebody's commitment, because they are expending quite a lot on it. It's also a signal of wealth. The bigger the diamond, the more they can afford. But if it were scaled to income, then it also becomes a good signal of I value you.
Hmm.
Or even something simple like how much time am I willing to spend with you? That shows that I am committed to you as a friend, as an ally, as a romantic partner. Time spent, it's only worth it for somebody who actually enjoys your company
Right.
and intends to stick around and possibly help you in the future. So little acts of generosity, kind of everyday elements of here, I'm helping you to do this, I'm helping you to do that, can be a signal of how much you value somebody.
Hmm.
And can be one way that people will believe, okay, now I believe that you are committed. I believe that you will be a good friend and help me when I really need it. How do I know that? Well, because you are doing all these other things, these small daily things that add up, but
Hmm.
that proves that you do actually value me and you will actually help me.
Reminds me of the whole love is a verb. Love is not just is not just a feeling, it's action and it's showing. And I see that all the time in my work with couples, right? Like show me you love me, show me it though, right? Show me the action. And
Yep,
so you're as you're pointing out, if the partner is interested, they will show because they want the other person to know. They want a signal that they'll
yep,
be that good partner, whether it's romantic, friendship, colleague, whatever it is.
yep. Talk is cheap.
Hmm.
Actions speak louder than words.
Right.
And so that's the show me matters.
Hmm.
Um, of course, some people might be demanding too much signals,
Mm,
and that might also push somebody away,
right.
especially if the demands are for something tangible, right?
Yeah, like a
Prove
massive
you love
diamond ring.
me. Yeah, yeah, buy me that diamond ring.
Yeah.
Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz, right, etc.,
Mhm.
right? Like buy me these useful things that I can take, and then I'm gonna buzz off,
Right.
right? Yeah, which is why perhaps the best signals are ones that are costly to give, but have no intrinsic value, like
Mm,
flowers. They're costly. Do they really benefit the person? Nah, only for a week or two.
mhm.
So it's a good signal, or just time. My time is costly to me. Does it provide any tangible benefit to you? Not really,
Right.
but it has great signaling value to you.
Mhm. And I think the biggest signals that people will look for in long-term partners are the ones that are harder to show. Like you're saying, flowers don't inherently mean you're cooperative. So, what are some ways that people will work to show those unseen traits? How do we make those seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think just time is a good example there. The more that somebody is giving up with their time, the better signal it means, right? If your friend, if you know that they're extremely busy at work, yet they're still there when you need them to help you move or when you have a fight with your partner and they're still there to provide an ear, despite the fact that they're extremely busy.
Mhm.
That says a lot, right? You are giving up this other thing to help me. That shows me how much you value me.
Right. As Pat was sharing his insights on signaling theory, I was reminded of my undergraduate thesis project that I completed with Pat as my research supervisor. In our study, we proposed that individuals who shamed others for engaging in quote unquote bad behavior are signaling that they themselves wouldn't engage in that behavior. For example, if you shamed someone else for cheating on their girlfriend, this might indicate to others that you yourself wouldn't cheat on your girlfriend. This type of shaming is called moral condemnation, which means to strongly disapprove of an act that is considered morally wrong.
Yeah, that's the hypothesis. Somebody who punishes others for misdeeds,
Hmm.
what they are doing is they're signaling that they're unlikely to be doing those misdeeds themselves. Because by condemning those acts, I am raising the costs for doing those acts.
Hmm.
And so therefore, it wouldn't be worth it for me to condemn this behavior if I were actually going to turn around and do it.
Right. I remember one of the examples we did was you see someone drop a $5 bill on the ground. Do you pick it up and take it for yourself, or do you pick it up and you go give it to that person? So we had some kind of low stake situations, higher stake situations with cheating. And so keeping in mind that people will signal to others that they wouldn't do that. The example I use most often in day to day is speeding, right? You hear someone, oh, they're going 140 on the highway. The other person goes, 140. Oh my God, I'd never go 140. Well, what are they doing? They're signaling that they're not speeding. They don't speed when they drive. Doesn't mean that they don't actually go 140, but they might be saying that to signal that they don't speed. And it was cool that we found that people do signal more. They will emphasize more that they don't speed, for example, when other people are watching them.
Yes, people get much more condemnatory when others are watching, which is part of the reason why social media is, such a firestorm. Just
Hmm.
flame wars everywhere. This is extremely public behavior. And so all of these mechanisms for, oh, okay, be condemn more when I'm observed. Here we have a very public phenomena. And so you get a lot of condemnation
Hmm.
online because it is a very public venue. And
Right.
also it's a venue where people might not be able to track that intention in other ways. They might not have other ways to demonstrate their own cooperativeness. And so they'll use that condemnation because that's the only means of attracting that attention, the only means of broadcasting their own morality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Social media with the whole, I'm going to show that by not supporting this, I am a good person. And then you get a
Mhm.
whole lot of people shitting on bad things happening in the world. And then at the same time, that propagates more and more, we'll say, negativity online and, changes the algorithms to that. That's all you see.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. One thing I should stress is that I've been just discussing this as if these signals are clear and also always honest. But of course, sometimes people will send fake signals. So, in order for people to pay attention to this, a signal doesn't need to be perfectly honest. It just needs to be honest on average,
Mm,
right? So, people who condemn an action, some of them might hypocritically do it, but probably fewer, right? So if you were to look at what proportion of people who condemn this activity actually do it versus what proportion of non-condemners actually do it, then there's probably more of the non-condemners who do it.
for
So
sure.
it's more, no piece of information is perfect. In reality, people use multiple signals, multiple cues in order to try and guess, is somebody going to cooperate with me? Right. So, my friend, this person who claims to be my friend, well, they helped me yesterday. Are they just going to turn around and take off with my money today? Well, maybe, but I also have all this other evidence of times that they have helped me. And so as a result, I say they're probably trustworthy because I
Right.
have multiple lines of evidence showing me that they're trustworthy.
Hmm.
Any one of those lines of evidence, somebody decided to help me one time, may or may not be honest. But if we aggregate the lines of information, then we can be more certain about somebody's trustworthiness or whether they're likely to cheat.
Hmm. It goes back to what you were saying about time, right? Investing time to witness this person's actions, and then the other person has to be investing time to perform the action multiple times, whether it's condemning or being cooperative or anything. Like you're the sum of your actions, not just one-offs.
Yes, I like that way of putting it. You are the sum of your actions. And the one thing I also want to stress at the end here is that I'm not saying any of this is conscious, right? People often don't know the reasons why they do things, or they don't know the motivations why they do things. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Right.
But instead, our minds have evolved to act in ways that bring these benefits. Just like you don't decide to date somebody because you think, oh, they're going to produce high quality babies. Instead, you're just like, oh, I like that person. They're hot. Your brain is taking all these cues of the symmetry, the smooth skin, et cetera, and is combining them into a single metric of they're hot. And it's the same thing with other social decisions, right? I'm not consciously tracking what all my friends are doing. And, did they help me this time and not that time, right? Bookkeeping is not a good idea. But
Right.
instead, your brain is kind of tracking that into a single metric of, I like that person or I trust that person.
Mhm.
And it's those more proximate emotions are what we're actually acting on.
Right. It would be pretty exhausting if we were completely aware all the time of
Good
what
God,
was
yes.
driving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun to analyze it after the fact, right? And I'm sure you think that way sometimes because this is your everything, right? This is your field. I also want to clarify that when I'm talking about other people struggling with these things, I struggle with them too because I'm human too. Like you and I,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
examiners of evolutionary psych, aren't immune to the evolution that has led us
Yeah. Far
to
from it.
make, yeah, to make maladaptive decisions sometimes.
Yep, we have imperfect information. We sometimes do things that used to be adaptive for us, but now aren't.
Mhm.
We have our own hangups. Everybody's human, right?
Right.
So we're all kind of following the same general rules, but we each have our own unique circumstances, and so we're applying them differently.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for sharing all your knowledge. I so appreciate it, and I so appreciate the excitement that comes through. Like I said at the start, it's so contagious, and there is so much excitement in this field.
I think so too. I think there's
Yeah.
a lot to be excited about out there. So it's
Mhm.
it's nice to be able to be part of it and to share it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, it's always appreciated for you to follow Mind the Gaps on your podcast streaming platform and to share it with your friends and family. To stay up to date on the show, you can find me on Instagram at Kirsten.Davidson. Thanks for minding the gaps with me today. I'll see you next time on the journey out of our comfort zone and into our growth zone.